welcome
I'm
to...
sorry, look, I already cut you off. I'll be quiet.
No, it's okay. I heard the pig in the background holiday. And so our guests will too. Welcome everybody to our final episode of season 3 of Mind Wars Forum. My name is Kinsey New Walker, and I work as the West Virginia Mind Wars Museum's executive director. And I've had the honor of hosting season 3 of Mind Wars Forum. This season's Mind Wars Forum has been made possible in part by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities. We launched earlier this year on February 1st, and episodes have occurred every 2 weeks since then. If you've missed previous episodes, you can visit the museum's YouTube channel or Facebook page to catch up. We've had an incredible season with a great range of guests and voices that represent what's best about this region. And tonight is no exception. I couldn't be more excited to bring on someone that I actually met virtually a little over 2 years ago when they were working on this piece for Teen Vogue. Lonnie reached out to the museum and wanted to do an interview, and I was like, Teen Vogue? What? Okay, let's go. And we've been real lucky to keep in close contact with them ever since. Lonnie Lee Hood, who you might know as Abby Lee Hood, is a trans Appalachian writer covering anti-trans and sustainability. Their book, Redneck Revolution, is forthcoming with West Virginia University Press, and their work about being a queer Appalachian and Southerner can be found in the New York Times, Tennessee Lookout, and many other places. They're all over the place. And they live on a tiny growing homestead and love old motorcycles. Lonnie, welcome to Mind Wars Forum. Thank you so much for being here and for using your real name for the first time. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry I cut you off in the beginning. I'm just literally so excited to be here. I love the West Virginia Mind Wars Museum. I love you in particular. It's hard to believe we met 2 years ago. But yeah, so this is the first time I've ever really used my name publicly. So if when we met, I was using the name Abby Lee, which I don't consider a dead name. It's okay. Like, I'm still using it professionally. It's kind of a transition period. And when you've got 10 years worth of work in under one name, it's hard to just change all of a sudden. I might as well go ahead and say a comment about the growing homestead, because you've probably already heard my pig walking around. Here is my cat. I've tried very hard to move them into other areas of the house, but then they yell even louder. So I do apologize for any swine or feline interruptions. I will try to keep them to a minimum. But regardless, I came out as a trans guy a few weeks ago. I want to start using my name. And Lonnie was my grandpa's nickname and my great uncle's first name. And so I thought, there's nobody better to do it with than you guys, than with the museum. So thanks for allowing me to experience that part of my journey. I'm very, very grateful to you.
Oh, thank you for trusting us with this. And congratulations. I want to begin with Teen Vogue, as I mentioned. It was published, I think, in late 2020, which feels like a totally different world. For me, it was like, I was just surprised to see like this kind of reporting coming from Teen Vogue, because I grew up seeing this magazine like at the gas station, and it would talk about Britney Spears' new outfit or like Justin Bieber's new haircut. And so this story really like made me recognize the shift that has happened or is currently happening. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the evolution of how this story came about and how it landed where it did.
Sure. Well, the first thing I have to say, I guess, is like a big ups to Teen Vogue. I feel like they've been on this journey of keeping people who are younger. Their audience is largely younger. I'm not sure the exact demographic, 20s. And I'm not on staff. I've never been on staff. I've just always been a really annoying freelancer who likes to pitch things and doesn't seem to stand or take no for an answer. So that's kind of how it got started. I had seen these articles about sort of like leftist ideas and some socialist ideas in Teen Vogue. And you said, 2020 feels like another lifetime ago. And it certainly was for me, because I was like living in Nashville in a tiny apartment. I hadn't like really figured out gender stuff yet. So looking back at that time, and I even say this in the book, like writing about Blair Mountain and that piece with Teen Vogue and our conversations and my conversations with Dr. Chuck Keeney, who I just admire to bits, and is on the board of the museum, of course. Those things were set me on a journey that changed my life forever. So it's really cool to kind of come full circle and talk to you about this piece, knowing where I was when I pitched it. And basically I had listened to Rev Left Radio, or Revolutionary Left Radio. It's a podcast, because I was searching for anything to give me hope. I was feeling like nothing I did changed the world for the better. I was trying to learn a little bit more about like leftist politics, because one of the things about me is that I turn to socialism or leftism. I don't really make a lot of the labels. But the thing is, I never read a lot of theory, right? Like I came to these politics because I feel like life punched me in the face over and over again. Like a lot of people, I didn't come to Blair Mountain, and I didn't come to the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum having read Marx or like understanding a lot of philosophy and theory. All I knew was that I wanted a better world. And as soon as I heard about Blair Mountain, it captured my attention, and it gave me hope in a way that nothing had before. So I reached out to Teen Vogue. I said, hey, I want to do this story. For whatever crazy reason that I will forever be grateful for, they let me do it. And it's also important to say, Teen Vogue, like I said, they sort of have this history of covering more in-depth topics over the years. And Kim Kelly is a labor columnist at Teen Vogue, and she's just put out her book about, lesser known or untold. I forget exactly how the subtitle goes, but it's like Untold Labor Stories. And she's at Teen Vogue. So they've got a great staff. They've got some good people. I know Condé Nast just unionized, and they own Teen Vogue. So again, I'm not on staff. I don't have all the ins and outs or like behind the scenes, but I can tell you that they're a great publication. And if that story had not been published, I would probably not be sitting here having this conversation with you.
Yeah, that's interesting. So like, did you learn about the mine wars through that podcast, or could you talk a little bit about like when you first discovered this history?
Yeah, it sort of fell into my lap exactly the way you described it through the podcast. Like I said, I after the 2016 election, and I was living in Chicago at the time of the 2016 election, and then I moved back to Nashville. I started to notice things that I had not really any knowledge of before. So like I lived in Chicago, and then when I moved back to Nashville, I was like, wow, I'm going to save so much money on rent. Turns out it's more expensive to live in Nashville a lot of the times than it is in Chicago. So there were these things happening in my personal life and in my financial life, where I was like, man, this system is just like not working for me. And I really want to know, like, what can I do, or what can anybody do, or what's the answer, right? So I was like looking for answers. And I thought, well, I don't know a lot about socialism or communism. Let me see what I can find out. And I started listening to Rev Left Radio. And then one day, like it fell from the sky, it felt like a divine moment. They did an episode about Blair Mountain. And I had never heard of that incident before in my life. And it was the first time where I was like, you're telling me a bunch of rednecks have power when they come together? It was thrilling. And it gave me like joy and hope that I hadn't had in a long time. So I've written so many pieces about Blair Mountain, and I'll probably never shut up about it. And thanks to Rev Left Radio for that.
I love that. It goes to show like just one story or one piece can really make a difference. And like you saying, I never heard about this. Like that's one of the most common phrases that we hear at the museum. People will walk in and be like, how come I never learned about this in school? And it's like, well, many of us didn't. And we have an exhibit on that. So
reason for that.
Yeah, there's a reason for that. Is there any like particular you've talked about socialism a little bit. Are there any particular like stories from the mine wars that really like inspired you or just drew you in? Like was it Blair Mountain? Was it something else?
There's a couple of things there, and first of all, I guess it's important to say I understand the miners didn't always call themselves socialists. Some did, some didn't. It's kind of blurry because they had to keep things under wraps to keep themselves safe. But there's this vignette. There's two little vignettes that I love to tell, and the first one is from Chuck Keeney because he told me about this time there was an integrated group of miners, black and white miners, and as everybody here probably already knows, Blair Mountain and the mine wars was comprised of a group of about 10,000 miners. Some of them were European immigrants. Some of them were like children of formerly enslaved people. Some of them were Appalachian hill folk. So you've got this diverse group of people. And this was, of course, in 1921, long before desegregation happened, or, there were pushes for it, of course, but this was decades before, desegregation happened to the Supreme Court. And so the miners were going to this cafeteria and they were going to sit down and eat, but the cafeteria workers wanted the black miners and the white miners to sit in a different room in the cafeteria. And they like held them at gunpoint. And they said, no, we're not eating in a different room. We're eating together. And I think that was one of the first times I felt like, hey, you know what? Like, I'm different. I feel different. I left Appalachia because I didn't fit in. I left for 10 years. Like, I was an expat for a long time. But then this story made me think, well, like, maybe, if in 1921 these miners could find enough in common to stick up for each other, like maybe I can find enough in common with other like poor white people, and maybe they could find enough in common with me to do the same. So it was the first time that I kind of had the idea that maybe Appalachia's got something special to offer. Maybe we got something special kind of going on here. So I love that story. And then the other one is that, as you are well aware, West Virginia was not the only place that had mine wars. And I'm not gonna, I won't get into the Pinkertons all that much, except for to say that they were not great people. And if you know anything about Ludlow, Colorado, and I may be pronouncing that wrong because I don't know anybody from Ludlow. I've only ever talked to them on the internet. So I just say it out loud the way I see it written in email and articles. But if you know the history of what happened at Ludlow, it was a very bloody incident in which women and children were killed in a miners' camp. There was labor organizing. The Pinkertons were hired to disband it, and essentially they brought in guns and killed a lot of innocent miners in their tents. They were just camping in tents, and they were killed. And when I posted a TikTok about Blair Mountain, or maybe it wasn't even Blair Mountain, there was a TikTok that I posted, and it was about being a redneck and being in Appalachia. And I will never forget it. It was probably one of the most touching things that's happened to me. This person commented, "We sons of Ludlow stand in solidarity." And it was just like I even get goosebumps thinking about it now. Like they're still here. We're still here. Like they've tried so hard. A lot of people in a lot of groups have tried so hard. They spent a lot of money to make sure that, poor people and poor diverse people in Appalachia and in other places around the country don't get to tell their story. And so for to see somebody from Ludlow to comment on my TikTok, like I think I cried. I was useless for a couple hours. I was like, it was just so beautiful that someone would ever share that with me. And it was a powerful moment for me. So those are my two favorites.
Yeah, that's a really special story about the TikTok. I love your TikToks, by the way. I'm on there. I don't post. And the museum just made a TikTok, so we may start posting a little more.
Follow y'all.
So how do you see? I feel like you touched on this question a little bit, but I want to expand on a little bit more. How do you see this history having impacted our lives today in Appalachia? Like, what can we learn from it?
Gosh, I think that answer is as individual or as unique as the individual. It impacted me deeply, and I feel like when I talk to most people who've heard about Blair Mountain, either you're sort of ambivalent to it or you're really into it. Like when I talk to people in West Virginia or you guys at the Mine Wars Museum, it seems to be something that gives people a lot of passion. People are very passionate about Blair Mountain. You don't just read about Blair Mountain and live in Appalachia and go, like it is arresting. And it is, I think if it's so special to me because it was my first introduction to like revolutionary concepts or militant organizing. But I think like I said, I think it is an individual reaction for everybody. But what I really hope is that, when people read the story, they do something actionable with it. I interviewed, I don't know if you know Billy Bragg, but he's a UK singer and singer-songwriter, and he does a lot of like activist music. He is a huge fan of Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger, and I don't want to speak for him, but he told me that his worst fear is when he sings his songs on stage and somebody buys a CD from him, that they might think that they've done their part by buying a Billy Bragg CD. And I also fear that like people will read the story of Blair Mountain and go, thanks, like I've done my part because now I know about Blair Mountain. And it's like, no matter what your individual reaction to it is, and I hope that it is a positive one, I think remembering that we can't just read stories like that and expect change to happen. It has to inspire you to be a better person. So I try to live by those ideals as much as humanly possible. And that way I carry Blair Mountain with me every day.
It's beautiful.
I don't know if it's beautiful or not, but it's the best way I can think to describe it.
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think this history has like you said, has power to bring folks together and then also inspire like a better future in a place where like hope is hard to find.
Right.
So I love that you said Blair Mountain, like this history is arresting, because I think that's a perfect word to describe it. I've never heard it described that way, but it does. This history does have a way of like sticking with you.
It stopped me in my tracks. When I heard about it, I just remember being not enamored, but I just like I couldn't take my headphones out of my ears. It so captivated me because, like a lot of people in this region, I often don't feel like things are getting better. And that was the first time that I was like, hey, you know what? Maybe we can do something about this. So I think, Blair Mountain has been, like I said, it's been important to me, but I continue to act upon it every day. And that has been my journey for the last 2 years, which I'm just like incredibly grateful for. I often say this, and I know people think I'm going to be cheesy or whatever, but like Blair Mountain has given me everything. I don't think I would have come out as trans if not for Blair Mountain. So I don't say that to people often because I don't want to be like cringe or whatever, but it's true. Like it helped me in so many ways.
Yeah. So you've written a lot about the mine wars since Teen Vogue. You've written about mine workers. You've done pieces on women mine workers, issues just concerning workers, period. What has been, if you can pick, what has been your favorite story so far?
God, you mean like mining in general?
Yeah, mining in general, and then also just all time. Like, what's your proudest work moment? Sorry, that's tough.
Ooh, that is a tough one. A couple of things come to mind. The first is that I did not know that there was a coal mine called the Pinkerton Mines in like right outside the town where I live. And I'm being a little cagey about that because it's the internet and I don't want to tell everybody the town where I live. So
yeah.
But there was a mine called the Pinkerton Mines, maybe 30 to 45 minutes away. And I did not know it, but the railroad track ran through the property that I grew up on. And so when I was a kid, I used to pick up railroad ties with my grandpa. Like me and people would take old railroad ties to the like scrap metal yard for money. And I never realized that I was picking up railroad ties from an old coal mine railroad. Like, because again, most of the time, this history is not super well known, even to people who literally live on the the property where the railroad was. So learning about that during all of this reporting was very cool. But then, of course, I also got to interview Kip Dawson and Merritt Moore and several other really interesting people for a story I did about back in the 1980s. In the south of Wales, there was a lot of union organizing activity for miners, like most, I mean, Margaret Thatcher was probably just as bad for minors as Ronald Reagan was, right? Like it was the 80s, and those were the two powers in the US and the UK. And one of the cool things that really struck me about that story was that in Wales, and in, I guess, other places in the UK as well, local LGBTQ communities would go out and raise money for the miners, and it would be like gays for minors, and they took money. They collected money for union organizing, and they got to visit the communities where the miners lived. And then, of course, unfortunately, the AIDS epidemic swept through, and I did not get to speak to any of those LGBTQ elders because they're gone. But I did get to speak to families of miners and miners who knew those activists, and really talked about how much they missed them, like family, even though they had passed away. And it was sort of reverse for them, like me, a queer person interacting with mining for the first time. Like in the 80s, if you were in the south of Wales, that might be the first time a miner interacted with a queer person, right? So it's kind of like vice versa. And I just thought those stories were really powerful, because again, it made me feel like, well, if they can do it, I can do it. Also, it's the same coal seam, by the way. It dips under the Atlantic Ocean after Appalachia, and it comes back up in Wales. So isn't that a cool factoid? It's the same coal they're mining, just in a different place.
Yeah, that is cool. That is cool. We got to bring Kip and Merritt, also Libby Lindsay. I don't know if you know her.
I have not met Libby.
And Jesse Wilkerson on the forum. So
nice.
But it was cool to hear from them, and they talked about that a little bit.
They're both so kick-ass. I don't know if I'm allowed to cuss on here, but that's the one exception I'll make, because there's no other way to describe those two individuals. Like, I mean, Libby I haven't met. Jesse I know, like, tangentially, but I've spent several hours talking to Kip and Merritt, and they're so cool. I love them so much. They're so cool.
They are so cool. So were those your favorite stories, like concerning mine workers and workers? Do you have, I'm sure you do, a favorite story of all time that you've worked on?
Favorite story of all time. Okay, let me think. I would say it's hard to pick one particular story, but recently I have been trying to focus on anti-transgender legislation in Tennessee. About a year or so ago, I decided that I wanted my beat, or like my niche as a writer, to be Appalachian sustainability, whatever that looks like. And to me, that really looked like fighting anti-trans legislation, because if we alienate the queer community here, and if we miss out on that solidarity opportunity, it's not going to go well for Appalachian sustainability. Like, to get all the other things that we need, I think we also need the queer community, right? Just like the miners needed the queer community in Wales in the 80s, and like they needed each other. And so it's hard to say if there's been one particular story, but I have felt probably the most fulfilled I've ever felt in my life. Really just like taking these legislators to task and trying to tear apart these arguments, because it's all like fake. And it's all money, and it's nasty business. It's really nasty business. I don't know how else to say it. And I'm just really grateful that people have been reading that work, or like paying me to do that work. I did a series of articles, and it's another thing I'm not gonna shut up about. Oh, I also got to cover the first unionized coffee shop in Nashville. So those people are very cool people. They're at Three Brothers Coffee. See, here's the thing. You asked me about my favorite story, and I'm like, well, really, it's the one I'm working on right now. That's always the case. But those are a couple that have really stood out, like outside mining, is like, pushing for the betterment of our region through fighting anti-trans legislation, like not letting kids have healthcare. How does that help Appalachia? I would love to know. Someone please tell me. Like, we already don't have enough healthcare, and now we're telling trans kids they can have even less. So it's things like that that really, I don't know, get me out of bed in the morning.
Yeah. Cool. Well, you do great work, and I am appreciative for your voice.
Appreciative of you. I have to tell you, like, I've never met a museum director before, but I certainly did not expect a museum director who's like young and blonde and a girl. Like, you. Yeah, I know you get that. I know that you hear that from people, but it was so cool to meet you and learn more about you, because I think you're representative of what our region needs.
Thanks, Lonnie. I had never met a museum director before either. So there's a whole other story. And here, I'm very fortunate and fulfilled to do this work. But I'm interviewing you, so we'll continue asking you the questions.
Sure thing.
We've hinted at this. This was in your bio. You're working on this new book, which is a big deal. It's for West Virginia University Press, and it's titled Redneck Revolution, which I love because folks are going to read it and be like, redneck? What? So, like, could you talk about, like, when is it coming out? Like, when can we expect to see it? And also, like, what kinds of stories are we going to find in it?
Sure. The book. Listen, if I tell you I want to write another book, I want you to, I don't know, like seriously question my sensibility. It's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I've never written a book. And it's been, I've learned more about myself while writing this book than I think I ever have learned. So it's called Redneck Revolution. I am in the process of finishing it. I'm about a week and a half out from having the copy turned into my editor. So in terms of like release date, that will be announced on Twitter. That's where most people can keep up with me. So I'll be like sending out emails, and I have, there's Twitter, and I have a website and all that good stuff. So I'll keep people filled in on the exact date, but hopefully it comes out later this year. That's the intent anyway. So every chapter is a different time and place in history. And the original premise was like hillbillies doing things that you don't expect them to do. We've talked a lot about the mine wars, but throughout this, I've also learned about the Coal Creek Wars, which are, I'm just going to say it, listen, and I'm sorry, I'm biased, but the Coal Creek Wars are even better. It's hard to believe. I know. Don't string me, don't skin me alive. It's true because these happened. The Coal Creek Wars, a lot of it happened in East Tennessee. And, there was convict leasing at the time, which was not exactly an extension of slavery, but it depends on who you ask about the definition of whether or not it was an extension of slavery. But basically, what white coal operators wanted to do was make black men work for them for free. And so they would lease convicts from the penitentiary in Nashville and have them work in the coal mines in Grundy County. And there were a lot of problems with that, most notably, of course, because they were treating these men incredibly badly. And most of them had been locked up for, I don't know, walking down a railroad track at night, like just total BS charges so they could throw them in jail and use them for free labor. And anyway, it also drove down wages for white miners in the area. And the free white miners also knew that those black miners were being treated horribly. And in fact, some of the people that are working on this research, I just talked to them, and they basically found evidence that it was run exactly like a plantation would have been. So when I say it's an extension of slavery, I guess I really kind of mean it. But regardless, the white miners were like, hey, we don't like how they're treating those dudes. And they're messing with our, it's hard to compete with free. So they just burned the stockade down. They were like, I don't like this. And so they liberated those black men and burn the stockade down, which is like, that's so cool to me. It was, I think it's an example of a movement that required one or two motivating factors, right? It wasn't just about one thing. So there's a chapter on the Coal Creek Wars. There's a chapter about the Battle of Athens. There's a chapter where I talk about being trans and why, basically talking about the people in Tennessee who are fighting back against this legislation because, as you and I both know, Appalachia is not nearly as backwards as some would like it to be or make it out to be. And there's just a lot of collected narratives. There's some storytelling from my personal life. It's sort of like me walking the reader through how I arrived at this redneck revolution of my own. And that's kind of what I think of it as. It's like, I'm on a redneck revolution, and I hope other people will join me, because if there's one thing I believe strongly, it's that Appalachia is full of diverse and very creative people. We know how to solve problems creatively because we've been solving problems with very few resources for like all of our lives. And there's a lot of really smart people here. So I think that the rest of the country should look to Appalachia as not just there's a lot of experts that'll be like, oh, well, when something goes wrong in Appalachia, it spreads to the rest of the country, like the opioid epidemic. It's kind of the canary in the coal mine. Sorry for the pun. But not only are we a bellwether, like we also have so much to offer this country in terms of creative solutions. And I really hope that when people read the book, that's what they come away with. Like, wow, I didn't know rednecks could be cool. And I didn't know that they could be ahead of the times. And I didn't know that they could be queer or black or whatever. And maybe I'll do something to help the redneck out. It's to people in Appalachia, but it's also to people outside Appalachia, because, when I lived in Chicago, people would be like, well, you sound like you're from Tennessee, but you're like liberal, like they couldn't mesh those things together. So busting some stereotypes, telling some stories about some cool events, and I don't know, trying to make people think of our region a little bit differently.
Yeah, that's awesome. I cannot wait for it to come out, and hopefully we can get you to the museum when it does.
Hey, listen, you tell me when to be there. Me and the pig, we'll load up. We'll be there.
Deal. Okay. So I've got 2 last questions for you, but I want to mention now, if you're watching and you've got questions for Lonnie, drop them in the comments and we can get to them at the end. So I'm curious, what kinds of issues do you see that are facing Appalachia today? And on the flip side of that, what are some possibilities? Because a lot of people like you at one point leave the region. I remember reading in Elizabeth Catt's book, West Virginia's biggest export is no longer coal, it's people. So a lot of people are leaving the state in mass numbers. And I think there are similar trends in Appalachia. So what kind of issues do you see? What kind of possibilities?
First of all, God bless Elizabeth Catt for editing my book. And God bless her for being patient with me and my madness in deadline aversion. And procrastination. Anyways, love her book. Would never say a bad thing about Elizabeth. She rocks. Anyway, so, one of the things that I've covered a lot, or have trying to study as much as possible, has been sustainable energy in Appalachia, because I'm so sorry. There's my pig and she's oinking, and she will continue to oink as she roams, and it should become more distant oinks. Anyway, so, I just did a story. It's still in edits. It'll be published soon. It's with the Washington Post, and it's about miners who are cleaning up their environment. And one of the people that I talked to, I don't remember his last name off the top of my head, because this piece, like I said, it's not published yet. It's still in edits. I would have to go back and make sure that I said and spelled it right. Regardless, there's this gentleman who was like underground for several years in the mines, became a mine manager, spent over a decade of his life. Actually, I think it's 2 decades, 22 years that he spent working in the coal mine industry. Maybe it was 10 years underground. Regardless, very experienced. And now he installs all kinds of, like, I didn't even know that there were solar panels that could filter water, but there are, and he installs them on people's houses. Like, he is so forward thinking. And, he did an internship with the Mountain Association. I believe that's the full name of the nonprofit. Again, I just did this story, so it's very fresh. You would think I'd remember it. I apologize. But he did an internship on renewable energy, and now he has his own business, and he installs solar panels and like water filtering, solar, electric power. He's a very cool gentleman. There's also Silicon Ranch and Clear Loop in Tennessee. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, one thing I've learned is that we could be and should be the leaders in green energy. And when you talk to people who have transitioned from mining to clean energy, they'll say things like, I just didn't, like, if you say anything about the Green New Deal, but you don't call it that, if you say, hey, because this is the truth, Appalachia powered this country through 2 world wars and an industrial revolution. Okay. We are energy. Like, that's what our region is. We have provided energy that built this country through the mining of coal, and still do to a certain extent. I think that we owe Green New Deal jobs to miners if they want them, or to our region in general. We can produce a lot of renewable energy through wind and solar. And I think we're poised to become a leader in that space. We have so many people who are doing, large scale projects and good work here. So that's kind of an example of like something that we struggle with, right? Because everybody wants to talk about how, the mining, there's a lot to say about the mining industry and people being unemployed, which may or may not be because of the mining industry. I think people like to have a lot of assumptions about the industry. But regardless, I think that we owe it to Appalachia to make sure that we are at least a part of the green energy future. And I think that you'll find nobody who is smarter about it than workers in our region. I'm very passionate about that. I think the other thing is, I'm so sorry.
No, I love it.
What I'm going to do is open the front door because that is what she is wanting.
Okay.
I have a 40, 50-pound pig for those of you, for the uninitiated. Please go outside. There you go. Go on. You're like a cat. You got to be in or out, in or out. You got to pick one. Okay. Sorry. It's getting about her supper time. So she was like, she probably has to go to the bathroom. She wants to go out in the yard and tootle around and eat some grass. So that's what she's going to do. Anyway. So that's an example of an opportunity. But the other thing that I really am starting to believe is that this idea that Appalachia has a lot of innovative solutions to offer. Like if you talk to organizers here, if you talk to people who've learned how to organize diverse groups of people, like poor white people or people of color or other marginalized communities, like the activists in Appalachia and the organizers here have to learn how to meld together diverse groups of people in such creative ways that I can't imagine. Like, again, I'm biased, but I can't imagine there's any region better suited to coming up with ideas about, I don't know, like I said, green energy, but also about voting rights and also about environmentalism and also like all of the major issues that are facing the U.S. today. Like, I truly believe Appalachia has solutions here if only we had like the platform, the people, the money, the investment to promote it. So in terms of possibilities, like I think they're literally limitless. If there is a problem like the opioid epidemic, or if there is a problem like poverty or unemployment or gas prices or, social safety nets not being distributed to the people who need them evenly because people who don't need them are getting that money, like we saw with PPP loans or when people complain about welfare or whatever, like all those social issues that America faces. There's a solution for it here in Appalachia. I 100% believe that. There's a solution for it in a lot of places. But I think in terms of possibilities, like the sky's the limit with us because there's nothing that we haven't had to survive. There's not a whole lot we haven't seen or done in Appalachia in the South. And I think if we can just figure out how to get our solutions, to the table, so to speak, I think there would be no better leader. That's what I would like. That's my agenda. I think Appalachia should be a leader in solving America's problems. And that's just how I feel about it. So those are my possibilities that I'm looking forward to.
Amen. Is there, first I'll say, like, do we have questions from the audience? Please drop them in so we can get to them. Lonnie, is there anything that you want to talk about tonight that I haven't asked you or we haven't like touched on?
I think there's one thing I would like to tell you, which is sort of random, but if you'll bear with me, I think it will make sense. So when I first left Appalachia, I went to Chicago and I didn't ask. There were two people going that I knew. And I was like, hey, I'm moving with you. Get me the heck out of here. Like, I want out. So we moved to Chicago and I went to school there and it was great. And I had a great experience, great people, learned a lot, love Chicago. It's still my second home, always will be. And then I moved back to Nashville because I thought there'd be better economic opportunity. And there like really kind of was for some people, but wasn't for people like me. And then I always said the one thing I would never do is move back to my hometown. I always said I would never do that because I was scared. I was so terrified that like my family would disown me because of who I am, because they are quite conservative and they disagree with most of the premises of being LGBTQ to more or lesser degree. Some of them, everybody's unique in my family, but I never thought I would come back because I never thought I would fit in and I never thought anybody would want me here. And that is so not true. I can't even tell you how untrue that is. Like in the last year, I wouldn't say I've made amends with my family, but I would say that we've gotten a lot closer. And like I fell in love for the first time in 6 or 7 years, which is pretty dope. And he's a dude and his name is Timmy and he's awesome. And I never thought that anybody would like accept me and love me for who I am, especially not here, especially not like a poor white dude who grew up hard like I did. I don't know. I just never thought those were possibilities for me here. But out there on my porch, just today, I potted, I think, 8 plants. And I got them from my friend Debbie. And I didn't know Debbie. I haven't known Debbie for very long, but she stopped by the house one day and she said, "Hey, I really like that plant in your yard. Can I have a cutting of it?" And she goes to the church across the street. And I guess at this point, like, if you meet me, it's pretty obvious that like something's going on. Okay. Like you don't meet me and think that is a straight person. Like nobody in this town looks at me and goes, that is a status quo individual. Like, I mean, I wear my, shout out to the red bandana. I wear a gay stripe version of it sometimes. Anyways, when I first met Debbie, when she first came to the house, I was like terrified of her because everybody in this town knows everybody. I sold a couch on Facebook to somebody who went to high school with my dad. My UPS delivery man worked with my dad. Like, you know what I mean? It's that kind of town where everybody knows everybody. And I was terrified of her because I was sort of like in my house, working from home behind my computer screen all the time. And she was one of the first people that like seemed to want to know me and wanted to be my friend. And I said she could have as much of my plant as she wanted. She could cut as much as she wanted for her daughter's wedding. And today I went over to her house and she like had a spade and dug me up a bunch of her plants so I could bring them home and propagate them. I'm going to cry talking about it. I shouldn't have started this. But it just, I know that it can't be that way for everybody. I know that Appalachia is not perfect. Sometimes I'll even say South Appalachia because I live in a southern middle Tennessee county in Tennessee, southern, of course, I've already said Tennessee, southern middle Tennessee. And the county, according to the ARC anyway, is part of Appalachia, but like everywhere else around me is not. So I say South Appalachia sometimes because I think the South and Appalachia are often very interchangeable. And I don't, labels, whatever. So all that to say, like, I don't know, man. I never thought I would fit in here. I thought that I could never come home. And as it turns out, people like Debbie don't seem to care. Like they may not know how to use they them pronouns. Like when me and my boyfriend go to the pool hall and he has on a crop top, like they may not know the words or the lingo, but they don't care. Like they don't care. And like I said, I know Appalachia's not perfect. We have our issues. Especially like I'm white, right? So I get off scot-free for a lot of things. Like I have white privilege. That's obvious. And there are people in this region that don't have white privilege, or are lesser privileged for any number of reasons. So I'm not saying that everybody can come back here and have the experience that I did. But all I know is like I've come back here and a lot of people have accepted me with open arms, even though I'm different. And like I have somebody who loves me and we want to get married. And I don't know, man. That's why I say like, if I had never found Blair Mountain, I don't know that I would have any of these things. So when I say that like finding that history gave me everything, I'm not sure I can express how much that's true. And, I have 8 plants on my porch to prove it. And I don't know. I think that's a touching thing I wanted to share.
That is touching. Appalachia is so lucky to have you and have you back. So yeah, I'm tickled for you. What kind of plants are they? I've got them.
We've got some German oregano, which is exciting because last year I brought home some mint that my peepaw had planted. And Peepaw's been gone now for like almost 10 years. So the fact that I have a mint plant from that he brought home, big deal to me. So I'm trying to, it's some herbs, some flowering plants, a couple of succulents. Let me tell you, Debbie has it all. Okay. I said, Debbie, first of all, is that a Brahma rooster? Because it's the biggest freaking rooster I've ever seen in my life. And it wasn't. So I don't know. She just has some like giant Hulk monster chickens out there, but she's pretty cool. So there's some cool people here in this town and in this region if you just get to know them.
Awesome. Shout out to Debbie. We've got a couple of questions that came through. The first one is from Randolph Shannon. Hey, Randolph. He says, can you comment on the diaspora from Appalachia?
Okay. Now this is one that I don't think I am suited to answer, because when we're talking about the diaspora, are we not talking about Black communities and African American communities? That's what I understand. Hey, the diaspora may be a word that I'm misinterpreting. But from what I understand, perhaps Randolph is asking about maybe the history of Black communities in Appalachia. Broadly speaking, I can say that, obviously enslaved people were brought here to this region, and later set free, quote unquote, to various degrees over time. But I don't think I'm really super qualified to talk about the diaspora, although there are tons of people who are. And actually, go ahead. You were going to say something.
I think he's talking about people leaving the region.
Oh.
So young people today mostly, but my grandparents were actually a part of this diaspora that happened in the late 50s, early 60s with the mechanization in the mines, and went to Chicago and later came back. So I think there's a couple different diasporas that have happened in Appalachia.
Hey, listen, here's a perfect example. You remember earlier when I said that I came to all this stuff because life is hard and not because I read a bunch of theory? There you go. I knew the word existed, but I've only ever heard diaspora in connection with, like I have a friend who teaches African American diaspora studies. And so I just thought that's what it meant. Yeah. So, hey, if this is the day I get canceled for not knowing a word, so be it. Anyway, so in terms of, like the Great Migrations, personally, I'm from a unique situation. My grandmother's family acquired or were given a land grant. We're not really sure. Somehow we got some land in the 1850s, and we've been there ever since. Like, I grew up on the plot of land where my great grandfather ran shine in the 20s and 30s. He was a bootlegger. So for me, my sort of leaving happened when I was older, but my family had always been here. And like I said, I know that not everybody can come back, right? Like, obviously when a lot of the factories closed down, even like there's a good example, Bill Monroe, right? Father of bluegrass. He worked in Chicago. He had to, because that was where the money was. So there were a lot of people, in the 50s and 60s, and throughout other time periods that left for economic reasons. I understand not everybody can come back. I understand not everybody wants to come back. But if there's one thing that I am adamant about, it is that I do not gatekeep Appalachian culture. I don't think there's any way you can gatekeep Appalachian culture, because when you've got, I don't know, Polish immigrants, Ukrainian immigrants, Italian immigrants, when you've got people whose ancestors were forcibly brought over from Africa, when you've got people who immigrated from Scotland and Ireland because they were, forcibly dying because of English colonization, like you've got all these groups of people. I don't know anymore who the culture belongs to, or who gets to say who isn't invited. So I personally extend my invitation. Listen, if somebody wants to be a redneck and come to Appalachia and they want to live here, please come on. We need you. There's a long history of the Great Migration. J.D. Vance talked a lot about that. But I hope that we move in the opposite direction.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry for my flimsy answer about that.
Yeah. Is there a specific organizer from the Mine Wars era that you relate to or connect to the most?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I probably have to say Mother Jones. what a badass lady. And I used to be a lady, or like used to think I was a lady, right? So I like Mother Jones a lot. And, I know that she went to Ludlow and she saw where those children were burned in the cellar or the basement. And I don't know, like she just seems like a person who was unafraid to do what it took to keep her people safe and to make a better life for working class white folks. But there, I mean, of course, there are, other, specific organizers as well. So like, I mean, I love the story of Sid Hatfield. I mean, like what a guy. And he got shot in the 1920s and I'm still mad about it. Like when you read about Sid Hatfield and what happened to him and the way that he was killed. So like, I really like Thunder in the Mountains by Lon Savage. When you read that, like you're pissed. Like, I mean, not only do you really admire this man as an organizer, but what happened to him was truly awful. So Mother Jones, Sid Hatfield, those are some of my favorite, like, quote unquote characters. But I would also like to say that knowing now that my great grandfather was a bootlegger and a moonshiner, I find that like finding those people in your own personal history, because that would have been during the same time period. He was born in 1893 or 94. And he was running shine, during Prohibition around a similar time period. So finding out there were people who did what they had to take care of their family and, did so even at the cost of having to go to court multiple times or whatever the case may be. Like, hey, I got a leader like that in my family. He wasn't a mine war era leader. He was from that time, but doing a different thing. So I think it's always cool when you can identify those personal historical connections as well. So Sid, Mother Jones, and Wentz Grinnell. Those are my three.
Love it. Perfect. I don't think we have any more questions.
Totally fine.
Lonnie, thank you. This has been awesome. And this is our final episode of season 3. It's been so much fun to have you on here and like reverse the roles a little bit. I know you've interviewed quite a few of us at the museum, and
I bother you all the time. It seems like every other week I'm like, hey man, I got something for you. I'm so sorry.
Keep bothering us. We love it. And can't wait to see where your stories go next, where you go next. I also want to give a thank you to our listeners, those who are with us tonight and those who have been with us for the entire season. It's been a lot of fun making these episodes. I think we've heard like an incredible range of voices in the region. We are going to drop a short Google form. It's like 5 minutes or less. Please leave us feedback so we can prepare for season 4. We'll drop a link in the comments now. I want to say thank you to the National Endowment for the Humanities for their support in this programming. Special thanks to my colleague Kirsten, who is coordinating magic behind the scenes and supporting us in tech. And thank you to the museum's members and donors who allow us to continue doing this work. And speaking of membership, we've got a pretty cool announcement and an invitation for those of you who are watching. If you've been waiting to sign up to become a museum member, now is the time. We are announcing a new limited edition red bandana that is coming to the museum's gift shop. We're going to put it up on the screen now in case you haven't seen it yet on our social media or
in your one that you guys posted on Facebook. I'm so sorry to interrupt. It's just beautiful. And I love the Persian pickle. I'm sure Wilma helped design that because it's just beautiful. And like, I'm sure she had her hands all in that. It's gorgeous.
Yes, it's so gorgeous. So it was designed by Sean Slifer, who's the museum's creative director. And it's actually based on like an original bandana that was carried into the 1921 Battle of Blair Mountain. It is union made in the USA by CW Press up in Pittsburgh. It's 100% cotton, will be super soft on your face. Will get softer with each wash, and only members can get their hands on it first. And they will receive a 20% discount. So bandanas will be $26. Museum members will get them for $21. Members access begins on May Day. So on May 1st, you'll be able to log in on our website. you can, if you haven't signed up for a membership yet, you can go to wvminewars.org/join. We'll include a link in the comments so you can sign up and get this super cool bandana. I think it is so beautiful, and we've only got a limited quantity of them. So grab it while it is hot. I'll say thanks to everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Lonnie, once again for helping us wrap up season 3. And we will see y'all next time on the forum for season 4. Good night, everybody.